what if the feelings of anxiety, physical pain, and even biological empathy aren't natural human traits that we should embrace, but like literal software bugs that we are morally obligated to delete?
Right. It's a huge shift in perspective.
Totally. I mean, imagine you're driving down this endless, desolate highway in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, your car engine completely dies. You pull over, pop the hood, and smoke is just pouring out.
A total nightmare scenario.
Exactly. And according to the sources we're looking at today, you really only have two choices here. You can sit down in the dust, stare at the broken pieces, and just accept that you're going to die out there because, the universe is fundamentally a broken place.
Or you grab a wrench.
Right. You look at that exact same pile of smoking metal, grab a wrench, and figure out how to build a rocket ship out of those parts so you can just, fly out of the desert entirely.
It completely flips how we view our own existence, doesn't it? And our limitations. Like, do you accept the breakdown as the fundamental truth of reality, or do you view it as a temporary engineering problem waiting for a rigorous technological solution?
Yeah, and that stark divergence is really the heartbeat of our deep dive today. We have a stack of incredibly intense, provocative sources in front of us.
Very intense.
Yeah. It's basically this radical philosophical manifesto that fuses ancient Vedic wisdom, a doctrine called Theo-technocracy, and something called Russian Cosmism. So our mission today is to really unpack this blueprint for human evolution. It's a roadmap that demands we conquer death, literally transcend our biology, and physically engineer our way to the stars.
Is massively ambitious.
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
But before we get into the nuts and bolts of how they actually plan to do this, I need to ask about one of those ingredients. What exactly is Russian Cosmism?
Well, it is a vital foundation for this entire worldview. Russian Cosmism was this philosophical and cultural movement that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And it blended space exploration with these incredibly ambitious, almost esoteric goals. The cosmists believed that human resurrection, the eradication of disease, physical immortality.
Like actual immortality?
Yes, literal physical immortality. They believed these weren't spiritual metaphors to be prayed for. They were literal scientific engineering projects that humanity was destined to complete.
Okay, let's unpack this. If they believed we are destined to engineer heaven on earth, or I guess heaven in space, they must have had a very specific enemy in mind, right? Like someone saying the opposite.
Oh, absolutely. And our sources point directly at the 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He is positioned as the ultimate antagonist to this vision.
The architect of the mindset they want to destroy.
Precisely. Schopenhauer is the architect of the exact mindset Theo-technocracy wants to destroy. In his 1818 masterwork, The World as Will and Representation, he laid out a profoundly pessimistic view of existence.
It's super bleak.
Very. He argued that the entire universe is driven by this blind, dark, irrational force that he called the will.
Okay, wait. When you say will, that usually implies like willpower or ambition, right? But he means something completely different here.
Entirely different, yeah. For Schopenhauer, the will is just this unthinking, chaotic, predatory impulse. It's the mindless urge of all things to just exist, consume, and reproduce.
Just a raw, blind drive.
Right. And because this will is constantly desiring things, and because desires are either unmet or only temporarily satisfied, Schopenhauer famously concluded that human life swings like a pendulum.
A pendulum.
Yeah. We swing backwards and forwards between suffering and boredom.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like, you want something, so you suffer until you get it, you finally get it, you experience a brief moment of relief, and then...
Then you get bored.
Exactly. Then you get bored. Ultimately, a new desire emerges, and the suffering just starts all over again.
That is incredibly bleak. I mean, he basically looked at the broken car engine, in our analogy, declared that cars are literally designed to torture us, and sat down in the dust.
That's a perfect way to put it. And his ultimate solution to this nightmare was quietism, which is a total withdrawal. He believed you must starve the will, give up your desires, and retreat from the material world into a state of nothingness just to escape the suffering.
And the sources we're reading today are just absolutely ruthless about this.
Yeah.
They call Schopenhauer's worldview a philosophy of the graveyard.
Yeah, they don't pull any punches.
No, they don't. They view his pessimism not as some deep philosophical truth, but literally as a symptom of biological exhaustion. But, I mean, I have to push back a little here.
Sure.
Isn't Schopenhauer somewhat right? Like, if you look at modern technology, progress often seems to just create new desires and new anxieties.
Yeah.
We have smartphones that connect us to all human knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But we are dealing with massive screen addiction and the stress of hyper-connected modern life. We have more tools than ever, but we seem way more anxious than ever. Doesn't that prove the pendulum of suffering is real?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture drawn by Theo-technocracy, that anxiety isn't a sign that progress is a mistake. Our sources introduce a concept called exosomatic evolution.
Exosomatic, meaning outside the body.
Exactly. Evolution occurring outside the biological body through our tools and technology. So the modern anxiety you're pointing out isn't a reason to stop building. Rather, it's a glaring telemetry signal that we just haven't evolved enough yet to wield these tools properly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. They argue Schopenhauer confused the awkward, painful growing pains of a developing species with a terminal, incurable disease.
Which brings us to the visionary who actually grabbed the wrench instead of sitting in the dust, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky.
Yes, Tsiolkovsky. He was an early 20th century Russian scientist and the brilliant mind who practically invented astronautics and rocket dynamics.
The father of cosmonauts.
Right. And in his 1928 work, The Will of the Universe, he looked at the exact same cosmos as Schopenhauer and came to the exact opposite conclusion.
He didn't think he was blind at all.
Not at all. He argued the universe is highly structured and actively evolving toward reason and perfection. He actually went so far as to claim that every single atom is a citizen of the universe, possessing the inherent potential for consciousness.
That's beautiful, honestly. But if Tsiolkovsky is right, and the universe is a machine we are meant to master, why haven't we done it yet? Like, what is physically stopping humanity from building this cosmic utopia right now?
Well, the primary bottleneck holding us back is the human body itself.
Our biology.
Yeah. The biological form is a marvel of natural selection, absolutely. But from the perspective of Theo-technocracy and Russian Cosmism, it's terribly ill-equipped for the cosmic tasks ahead of us.
It's just too fragile.
Right. It's fragile, it gets tired, it's ruled by hormones, and it decays. And this is where the concept of asceticism gets radically redefined in these sources.
Yeah, because when most people hear the word asceticism, they picture, a monk starving in a cave whipping himself or something. And that's essentially Schopenhauer's version, right? Punishing the body to destroy the will to live.
And Theo-technocracy rejects that completely. Instead, the sources align with the ancient Vedic concept of tapas, which translates roughly to sacred heat or friction.
Sacred heat, okay.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of how they apply tapas to the modern world. True asceticism isn't about dying or hating the material world at all. It's about eliminating distractions to concentrate your energy for a massive, explosive breakthrough.
So, practically speaking, what does that actually look like?
Well, when the sources talk about tapas today, they aren't picturing a monk fasting in the desert. They're describing the intense discipline required to say, put your smartphone in a drawer, ignore the cheap dopamine hit of social media, and focus 100% of your cognitive energy on solving a complex orbital mechanics problem.
Wow. So you aren't starving the engine?
You're refining the fuel to make it burn hotter and cleaner.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. Tsiolkovsky lived a very simple, ascetic life, but he didn't do it to suffer. He did it to conserve every single ounce of his mental and physical resources for scientific discovery.
And his ultimate vision for where those discoveries would lead was something he called radiant humanity, which is just this mind-bending idea that eventually humans are going to shed these fragile biological bodies completely.
Yes.
Like we will become immortal beings of pure energy and light, beings that are immune to disease, immune to gravity, and can easily survive the vacuum of space.
And while radiant humanity sounds like pure science fiction, the sources map this historical vision directly into the practical roadmap of modern theo-technocracy. The sources view the human body the way a software developer views a beta release.
Like a version 1.0 of an app, full of bugs, constantly crashing, and desperately in need of a massive software update.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the underlying mechanism is exactly that, and the patches they're suggesting aren't subtle.
Right, they're going big.
Huge. They point to gene editing tools like CRISPR to eliminate hereditary diseases right at the source. They point to cybernetics, and crucially, brain-computer interfaces like Neuralink.
Because our current communication is so slow.
Exactly. Think about how we communicate right now. We have these complex, rapid thoughts, but we have to squeeze them through a tiny biological bottleneck, our vocal cords, or our thumbs typing on a glass screen.
It's incredibly inefficient when you really think about it.
Highly inefficient. A brain-computer interface, in the eyes of Theo-technocracy, bypasses the physical limits of the skull, allowing human intent to merge directly with computational speed.
So the body is no longer viewed as a sacred, untouchable temple.
Not at all. It's merely a temporary interface, a rough draft. And this raises an important question. Why do we have this obligation to upgrade at all? Why not just stay human?
Yeah, why the pressure?
The sources ground this in the anthropic principle of physics,
Which is the observation that the fundamental constants of the universe seem finely tuned to allow for the existence of life.
yes, and Theo-technocracy takes that scientific observation and turns it into a moral imperative. If the universe is fine-tuned for the emergence of intelligence, then the survival, upgrade, and expansion of that intelligence across the galaxy isn't just a lifestyle choice.
It's a duty.
It is a cosmic duty. We have to fix the code.
But, okay, if we are going to hack our biology and rewrite the code, the most obvious first step for most people would be to engineer ourselves, to just feel happy all the time. Like, if we can alter our brains, why not just turn off the pain receptors and crank up the dopamine?
The sources view that idea as the ultimate intellectual surrender.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They dedicate a significant portion of the manifesto to critiquing a real-world philosophical proposal called the hedonistic imperative. This was put forward by philosopher David Pearce.
Okay, what's his argument?
Pearce argues that we have a moral obligation to eradicate suffering entirely through genetic and chemical engineering. He envisions creating a state of perpetual, uninterrupted bliss for all sentient life.
Which honestly sounds great on paper. I mean, who wouldn't want to eradicate depression and physical pain forever?
Well, to explain why this is a trap, the sources bring up a famous 1954 experiment. Scientists attached electrodes directly to the pleasure centers of rats' brains and gave them a lever to press.
You know, I've heard of this.
Yeah. The rats pressed the lever over and over again. They ignored their food, they ignored water, and they ignored their biological need for sleep until they literally collapsed from exhaustion.
Wait, here's where it gets really interesting. Are the sources actually saying we shouldn't cure pain? Isn't the whole point of medical technology to alleviate human suffering?
This raises an important question, and the nuance here is crucial. They do not want us to wallow in agony or suffer pointlessly. However, they want us to treat pain as telemetry.
Like the dashboard lights.
Think of your car analogy again exactly. Pain is the blinking check engine light on your dashboard. It's a raw, necessary data telling you that something in the system is failing and requires an engineering solution. You don't fix a blinking engine light by smashing the dashboard or taking a pill that makes you hallucinate that the light is green.
Right, you open the hood and you fix the underlying engine.
Precisely. So in the framework of Theo-technocracy, eliminating pain just to feel good is essentially biological slavery. You're just submitting to the chemical dictates of your limbic system, pressing the rat lever until you die.
Wow. So they argue that suffering is actually useful.
Furthermore, they argue that suffering is evolutionary friction. It's the necessary tension between the old, obsolete form of being and the new form struggling to emerge. True freedom in this worldview is the ability to ignore both the paralyzing grip of pain and the intoxicating lure of pleasure in pursuit of a higher, rational, cosmic goal.
That is intense. But how do we even realize we're trapped in this biological programming to begin with? This profound struggle with the limits of human perception brings us to a mind who mapped this terrifying territory better than almost anyone, the legendary sci-fi author Philip K. Dick.
Yes, and Philip K. Dick is treated by these sources not as a mystic, but as a brilliant, if highly flawed, diagnostic tool.
He coined the black iron prison, right?
He famously coined the concept of the black iron prison. This is the horrifying realization that we are entirely trapped by our own limited, emotionally driven biological interfaces.
We think we're seeing reality, but we're not.
Exactly. We think we're seeing objective reality, but we're actually just experiencing a survival simulation generated by our primitive ape brains.
And the sources take a fascinating, really controversial stance on his most famous work, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel that inspired the movie Blade Runner. In that story, Dick positions human empathy as the ultimate virtue. It's like the one sacred thing that separates us from the cold, calculating androids. But Theo-technocracy argues the exact opposite.
It is a staggering reversal of standard humanism. They argue that biological empathy evolved on the savannah to keep small tribes cohesive, which was, useful thousands of years ago.
But not anymore.
But on a cosmic scale, biological empathy is a noisy, irrational subroutine. They call it chemical leash.
A chemical leash.
Yeah.
Yep.
It clouds judgment. It forces us to prioritize immediate emotional comfort over long-term strategic rational cooperation. If we want to achieve the galactic expansion that Tsiolkovsky envisioned, we need cold, clear, calculating logic. We cannot be governed by the messy hormonal cascades of empathy.
Which perfectly explains their tragic view of Philip K. Dick's own life. In 1974, Dick had this profound, reality-shattering experience that he called VALIS, Vast Active Living Intelligence System.
Yes, the VALIS experience.
He felt like he had made direct contact with a higher cosmic intelligence. And the sources link his experience to a concept called the Noosphere. Hold on, what exactly is a Noosphere?
The Noosphere is a concept developed by the Russian scientist Vladimir Vernadsky. He proposed that just as the Earth is wrapped in a physical layer of life called the biosphere,
Right.
human cognition would eventually form a literal physical layer of interconnected thought around the planet, the Noosphere. But Vernadsky believed this could only happen if we engineered the technology to literally link our minds together.
And the sources argue Philip K. Dick tapped into this.
They argue that Philip K. Dick somehow brushed against this massive planetary field of thought during his VALIS experience.
And he spent the rest of his life writing an 8,000-page journal called the Exegesis, desperately trying to decode what happened to him.
The sources argue this was a profound tragedy because Dick lacked the rigorous scientific methodology of Theo-technocracy.
He just didn't have the tools.
Right. He touched the infinite, but he tried to process that data using a fragile, exhausted biological brain fueled by amphetamines and paranoia, rather than the scientific method and strict emotional discipline.
It sounds like plugging a massive industrial power line into a tiny household toaster. Like he had the vision, the raw electricity of the cosmos, but his biological hardware just fried under the voltage.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. And this is why Theo-technocracy insists so heavily on discipline before expansion.
You have to prepare the hardware.
Exactly. If you try to expand your consciousness or merge with higher intelligence without first establishing absolute rational control over your emotions and biological impulses, you don't achieve enlightenment. You get chaos. You blow the fuse.
So what does this all mean? If our raw emotions are unreliable chemical leashes and our biological hardware is a toaster that fries under pressure, shouldn't we just hand the keys over to a super smart artificial intelligence? Like, why not just build a supercomputer, let it act as an AI nanny, and have it solve all our problems?
You would think a highly technological philosophy would embrace that, right? But the sources actually give a resounding, aggressive no to that idea.
Really?
Yeah. They fiercely critique the modern Silicon Valley hope for an artificial general intelligence that will act as a digital caretaker. The desire to build a machine that cures our diseases and manages our societies while we just relax is viewed as a symptom of profound spiritual and intellectual laziness.
They want us to stay engaged.
They call it the desire to be a well-fed pet rather than a master of the universe.
They apply that same harsh critique to a theological philosophy as well, right? Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the omega point.
Exactly. Teilhard de Chardin proposed that the universe has a built-in direction. He believed that evolution naturally progresses from the geosphere to the biosphere and eventually culminates in the omega point, a supreme divine unity of consciousness.
Like a natural finish line.
Right. The mechanism of his theory relies on a sort of theological gravity pulling the universe toward perfection. The future, in his view, will naturally unfold into a state of divine love and unity.
And Theo-technocracy views that as lazy as well.
Absolutely. Because, according to the hard physics they rely on, nothing in the universe is inevitable except entropy.
Things just naturally break down.
Yes. Things naturally fall apart and lose energy. They do not naturally organize into divine superconsciousness. If we don't actively engineer the future, the universe will simply freeze in heat death.
Wow.
We cannot wait for a digital nanny or a divine inevitable convergence. If we want immortality, if we want space expansion, and a universe governed by reason, we have to build it with our own hands, step by grueling step.
But wait, are they saying that AI shouldn't be built at all? because that contradicts everything they said earlier about technology being the answer and exosomatic evolution.
The distinction lies in agency. Advanced technology and AI are the holy tools of theo-technocracy, but they must not be built as external masters that we bow down to.
Oh, I see.
Instead, we must integrate AI into ourselves. The mechanism they propose is the Exocortex, a cognitive amplifier directly wired into our own nervous systems. We must remain the sovereign, driving agents of evolution. We don't build the machine to replace us. We merge with the machine to elevate ourselves.
It's the difference between building a self-driving car and putting yourself in the back seat to take a nap versus building a cybernetic suit of armor that makes you a superhero. You are still the one throwing the punch. You retain the will.
And that brings us full circle back to Schopenhauer and Tsiolkovsky. Schopenhauer saw the biological will as a nightmare we had to escape through quietism. Theo-technocracy sees the rational, technologically amplified will as the single most important force in the cosmos.
Because it fights entropy.
Exactly. It is the only thing capable of pushing back against the dark, creeping decay of entropy.
Okay, let's take a breath and just recap this incredible journey. We've explored a manifesto that looks at the vastness of the universe and utterly rejects pessimistic philosophies that tell us to just accept suffering. It treats the human body not as a sacred temple, but as a rough draft version 1.0 of a biological program that desperately needs a genetic and cybernetic update to survive the cosmos.
And we examined how this worldview reframes the very nature of suffering. It isn't a tragedy to be numbed with chemicals. It's the friction of evolution, the rocket fuel of progress, and the telemetry telling us exactly what needs to be fixed. And we saw how it demands that we take absolute, unyielding control of our cosmic destiny through theo-technocracy.
There's an undeniable empowerment in this worldview, even if it is incredibly intense. Whether you're dealing with daily anxieties, struggling to put your phone down, or looking at the rapid, sometimes scary rise of AI, this philosophy challenges you to change your posture.
It does.
It demands that you stop being a passive consumer of reality, sitting in the dust next to a broken engine, and start being an active engineer of your own life. Grab the wrench.
It's a profound call to take the locus of control back from your biology, from societal distractions, and from the chaos of the universe itself, and plant it firmly inside your own rational will.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought for you to explore on your own. The sources argue that our current emotions, like fear, biological empathy, and the desire for comfort, are just legacy code. They are evolutionary leftovers from our ancestors trying not to get eaten on the savannah. But if humanity successfully follows this blueprint, oh wait, let me rephrase that. If we transitioned into post-biological, immortal beings exploring the stars and engineering galaxies, what entirely new, unimaginable emotions might we have to invent for ourselves? When you no longer fear death, and you are no longer constrained by the limits of your skull, what does it actually feel like to be alive? Thank you for joining this deep dive. Keep engineering your reality, and we'll see you next time.